The miscalculation that shaped the Pacific War. At 9:17 a.m. on December 7, 1941, Commander Minoru Genda stood on the deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi, watching the final elements of the second wave of Japanese aircraft trace south toward Pearl Harbor. The plan unfolding before him was the product of nearly a year of focused development. Genda had considered every angle, every patrol schedule, and every defensive measure the Americans might have employed. He knew the layout of Pearl Harbor so well he could draw it by memory. Japan believed it understood everything necessary to strike a decisive blow. Yet hidden behind the precision of this operation lay a devastating flaw. An intelligence miscalculation so fundamental that in hindsight, the war's outcome had been effectively decided before the first bomb fell. This miscalculation was not about ships, aircraft, or even industrial capacity. It was about manpower, the ability of a nation to put trained sailors and aviators into its navy. Japanese planners predicted that by 1943, the U.S. Navy would consist of around 300,000 total personnel. The actual number was over 2.3 million. Japan had underestimated American naval personnel capacity by more than sevenfold. The origins of this mistake stretched back to early 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, when a young naval intelligence officer named Ensign Takeo Yoshikawa arrived in Honolulu under diplomatic cover. Yoshikawa was meticulous, intelligent, and dedicated. He studied ship movements, took tour boats around Pearl Harbor, rented aircraft to survey facilities from the air, and memorized defensive routines. His reporting was thorough and accurate.
The failure did not lie with him. The failure lay in how Tokyo interpreted what he sent. Japanese leaders assumed that the Americans manned their ships the same way Japan did, lean crews trained for years to achieve elite efficiency. Japanese carriers sailed with roughly 1,500 crew. American carriers, based on Japanese assumptions, were thought to be similar. But the Americans manned their ships much more heavily, prioritizing resilience and redundancy rather than elegant economy. Damage control, maintenance turnover, and rapid sortie generation required large teams, and the Americans trained and deployed them at a scale Japan could not imagine. This misunderstanding reflected a deeper cultural challenge known to intelligence scholars as mirror imaging, the belief that an opponent thinks and operates the same way as oneself. Japan assumed America shared its values of elite training, slow personnel development, and strict manpower limitations. This was a fatal assumption. The Japanese naval system had been built to cultivate exceptionally skilled career sailors through slow, selective recruitment. The Imperial Navy expanded from around 120,000 personnel pre-war to roughly 300,000 at its peak, and even this was considered a major national effort. Japan did not rely heavily on reserves, did not mass recruit civilians, and did not integrate large numbers of women into military support roles. It had no framework for imagining a navy built on mass mobilization.
Then came Guadalcanal. In August 1942, the Japanese expected the U.S. to land perhaps 10,000 troops, a number consistent with their understanding of American manpower limits. Instead, the United States landed over 16,000 in the initial assault, with continuous reinforcement. Meanwhile, the Americans maintained simultaneous Atlantic operations, convoy support to Britain, and global naval commitments without slowing Pacific deployments. From Japan's perspective, this should have been impossible. By early 1943, even Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, warned Tokyo that the intelligence assumptions underpinning the war were collapsing. Yamamoto understood America better than most, having studied at Harvard and served in Washington. But his warnings arrived late. Japanese intelligence analysts were finally ordered to rebuild manpower estimates from scratch. They collected submarine sightings, prisoner interrogations, radio intercepts, and ship deployment records, then recalculated using actual American manning standards. The revised estimate suggested that the U.S. Navy already exceeded 1 million personnel and might soon double that. Even these revised numbers were conservative. The truth was that the United States was only getting started. The decisive evidence arrived in a form no one in Tokyo expected. It came not from spies, intercepted communications, or aerial reconnaissance, but from the interrogation of a young U.S. Navy sailor who had been taken prisoner after his ship was sunk in the Solomon Islands. During questioning, he made an offhand remark about his training. He explained that the basic training facility he had passed through processed nearly 20,000 new recruits every single month. The Japanese interrogators were stunned. They assumed it had to be a mistranslation, an exaggeration, or perhaps a misunderstanding. No military training institution in Japan, or even the entire Japanese Empire, handled anything close to that scale. But the number was accurate. That was the moment, quietly and without ceremony, when Tokyo first confronted the reality of the war it had chosen. Japan had not entered into a limited conflict, one in which it could seize territory, establish a fortified defensive perimeter, and negotiate favorable terms. Instead, it had engaged in a war of total national mobilization against a country whose industrial capacity, manpower reserves, and economic potential dwarfed anything Japanese planners had imagined. Japan's grand strategy was built on assumptions formed by observing previous American conflicts. Japanese leaders believed that America, though wealthy, was fundamentally impatient and casualty-averse. They assumed that Americans would not endure a long, bloody struggle thousands of miles across the Pacific. But the sailors' testimony and the statistical realities that Japanese analysts eventually confirmed revealed that the United States could not only replace every lost aircraft, ship, and trained serviceman, but could expand its forces at a rate Japan could never hope to match. The ratio was not 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1, it was 10-to-1 or more. The true turning point of the Pacific War did not occur at Midway, Guadalcanal, or Leyte Gulf, though those battles are famous for their drama. The decisive moment came quietly in the analytical rooms of the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, where long-held cultural assumptions prevented a realistic understanding of American strength. Japan had planned for a